So we're going to jump right into the scripture this morning. And I was told, like, right before the service began, that we don't have any of the slides. So here's some good news. And guys, let's not even worry about it. So don't even make it a distraction. It's fine. You guys are all grown-ups in here, and we're going to be good with this. So we're in the battle series, and luckily, maybe it was like God knew this was going to happen. Luckily, I put in your bulletin this week, like the passage of scripture that we're going to be out of. So if you got a bulletin on your way in from one of our greeters or ushers, like you've got it in there where we're going to be at. We're going to be in Exodus. And so you can, if you got a Bible with you, feel free to just turn your Word of God, open up to Exodus chapter 13. If you got it on your phone, or hey, they got it up. It's a miracle. Okay, so Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 through 19, something happened, and you're going to have it. So we're just going to jump in this together. Let me give you a little bit of setup, and then we're going to roll right into, let's see, verse 17. All right, so here's kind of the setup. If you have been around the church for a little while, you already know this. There's a really good chance, even if you've not been around the church for a while, that you already know a little bit about this story. So this is happening right after Pharaoh let the Hebrews go, the Israelites go. So the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, had spent about 400 years of their existence in slavery to the people of Egypt and under Pharaoh's rule. And so over just a series of events of God's hand moving, Pharaoh lets the Hebrew people go, and they leave Egypt. And kind of where we're picking up today is shortly after they have left Egypt. And so we're kind of in between miracles, if you will. We're in between these, the 10 miracles that God did to set the people free, and we're before the next miracle that we'll talk about at the very end of the message today. That is a miracle it literally is known all over the world. So we're kind of in that moment in between, and I don't know if you showed up here this morning and you just feel like you're just in between right now, that you're in a place in between maybe of what God's doing in your life. So that's where we're picking up. Here's verse 17. It says this: Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. I want you to do me a favor. Just look at your neighbor one more time. I know this is a little interactive this morning, and I want you to tell them this ain't no place for shortcuts. Yeah, this ain't no place for shortcuts. Like sometimes shortcuts are cool when you're driving down the road and you're trying to get to a place you want to go like quicker. Maybe the shortcut is the thing. But listen, God doesn't grant shortcuts. And I think this is the powerful point of this passage. There was a way for the Hebrew people to get to where God was leading them that was geographically or physically shorter than the way that they took to get there. Like there was a way that they could have traveled by, and they could have gotten there geographically a lot quicker than they did by the way that God took them. But God didn't allow them to go the shorter way, because here's what God knew about their journey and about what was ahead of them that they didn't know. God knew that if they went the shorter route, even though that was the quicker route, right, that would have got them there. If they would have gone the shorter route, God said, look, if they do that, they're going to encounter the Philistines in the Philistine territory. If they encounter the Philistine people, they're not ready for the battle that they're going to bring against the people. There are some battles that you ain't ready for, and God's going to protect you from going into them. There are some battles that you're not ready for, that if you're not careful, you're going to walk into it, and then you're going to feel the weight of that battle because you weren't meant to walk into it. Sometimes God is taking us a different direction. He's taking us along a different route instead of the shortest route, because God doesn't grant shortcuts, because he knows that if we encounter what's lying ahead, that if we encounter the enemy that is stronger than we are, and they are badder than we are, and they can fight better than we can, God already knows. He says, look, if they encounter the people, I already know what my people are going to do. They're going to turn around, and they're going to go right back to Egypt. God doesn't grant shortcuts in our life. There's some things that you can't shortcut. Here's what I think is amazing. This passage is, for me, there's such depth to it, because this is a group of people that have been slaves for 400 years. Like, we can't even imagine that. There's very few of us in this room that even have an ancestry of slavery in our heritage, in our background. But even those of us who have that in our background, we can't even imagine it because we're so far from it. These people have been living in slavery at this point for 400 years. That means their parents were slaves, their grandparents were slaves, their great-grandparents were slaves, their great-great-grandparents were slaves, their great-great-great-grandparents were slaves. For 400 years, all they've known is how to be a slave. For 400 years, all they've known is what it's like to live in slavery. And then in an instant, right? Like, this isn't even a shortcut, but in an instant, they are set free. Like, by the word of Pharaoh, they get just one day, by his word of setting them free, they go from slaves to free people like instantaneous. It happens in a moment. He emancipates them, and in one moment, they are no longer slaves, but they have been totally set free. Look, freedom is instantaneous. Learning how to live free, now that's a process. They were instantaneously the people of God because God spoke that of them. Like they were able to receive the identity that God had placed on them as his people, like instantaneously. That happened in a moment. God said, you're my people, and they automatically became their people. Living like the people of God, not just holding the title, right? Not just claiming the title for themselves, but actually living like the people of God. That was something that was going to take them through a process, that they became the people of God in an instant. They got set free in an instant. Living like the people of God, learning to live in that freedom, that was going to be a process. And guess what? You can't shortcut that process. Man, there are some things that you cannot shortcut in life, and God is not going to take you on the shorter route because you have to go through the process in order to get where God is taking you, in order to get to the place that God wants you to be. And if you shortcut the process, then you miss all the blood. You miss everything that God is trying to do along the way to teach you something. See that here's the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, they couldn't take the shortcut because they only know how to be slaves. God's gonna take them through the desert. It's gonna take 40 years for them to begin to learn what it even means and looks like to live as the people of God. Like, they don't know how to trust God because for 400 years they felt like he was absent. And I don't know where you're at this morning, but maybe you showed up and you kind of feel like God is absent in your life. And even in those moments where we feel like he's absent sometimes, he's still at work. And he was still at work. It wasn't that he was far away, but now he's got to teach these people who belong to him even what it looks like to belong to him, what it looks like to be his people. And that's a process. That takes time. There's some things in life, man, you can't shortcut. Like, I've never like played like the Powerball or any of those things, but this is definitely not like a recommendation or anything. You're welcome to well, I'm not talking about the lottery at this point. I was going to talk about a video. I was watching on Hulu, a series. It's called Lethal Weapon. You guys watch it? And so I'm trying to catch up and get caught up on the season. And one of the episodes recently was about this dude who like had the winning lottery ticket numbers, and then he gets killed because, it's Lethal Weapon. Somebody's got to die. So the whole thing was about the lottery. So I got to thinking about that because there's a statistic, and I didn't do the research to find out what the answer is to the statistic. But there's a statistic out there that people who win the lottery within like a few years of them winning the lottery, they're back in the same place that they were before they won the lottery. Did you know that? Like, you can make $20,000 a year and win $20 million, and then somehow within like 5 years, you're back to $20,000 a year. Like, how in the world does that even happen? It's because like they got shortcutted to wealth. They inherited all this money, or they won all this money, and all of a sudden it's like thrust upon them, but they hadn't even gone through the process to know how to even manage, how to live with that kind of money. So they got this wealth all of a sudden, but they're not even capable of managing the wealth because they have a character that's able to be sustained by their character with $20,000 or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden they end up with this incredible blessing, or it looks like a blessing, and within years they're right back at the same spot because their character couldn't maintain the blessing that they fell into. And it's the same way with us when it comes to our walk with God. Man, there are some things that you can't shortcut because God has to take us through the process and bring us through the process to bring us to the place where he wants us to be. And if you shortcut it, you end up falling away. If you shortcut it, you end up messing the whole blessing, the whole promise all along the way. God knew that if his people took the shorter route, if they took the short way into the promised land, they would never make it. They would return back to the same slavery that they just got freed from. And that's just crazy, right? Because if you know the story of the people, man, their enslavement is not a pleasant thing. In fact, there towards the end, it had gotten more harsh and more brutal on them, and they were begging for redemption. They were begging to be set free. They were looking for something different. And yet God knew that if they encountered an enemy, if they walked into a battle that they weren't prepared for, that they would run back to the very slavery that they were trying to run away from. And you can be set free in an instant. Man, you are saved by the grace of God, and that is instantaneous. You want to know something? You are no more forgiven right now than you will be 10 years from now if you're a follower of Jesus. Do you realize that? Like you are no more forgiven right now than you were 5 days ago, or that you will be from 5 days from now. And it doesn't even matter what you did last night or the night before that or the night before that, right? It doesn't matter what you're trying to hide or cover up. I'm just telling you that your salvation from your Heavenly Father is instantaneous. Like the moment that you surrender and you give your life to Him, you are no more forgiven in that moment than you are in 5 years from the moment, 10 years from that moment. It is instantaneous. It is all at once. But becoming the people of God, this is called sanctification, becoming like Christ. And that's something that just takes time. You know why it takes time? Because we all got an Egypt. Every one of us has an Egypt. Every one of us has that moment before Christ entered into our life. All of us have those things that have a tendency to enslave us if we give our lives into it. We have those areas in our life that even though it's not good for us, even though it's not healthy for us, we keep going back to because it's comfortable. Like, am I talking to anyone this morning? Like, we have those areas in our life, those places that, like, we like to go, and we may not want everybody to know about, and we know that it's probably not even a good thing for us, but we go there. Why? Because it's comfortable. Like, yeah, it may be slavery, but at least I know how to operate in slavery. Yeah, it may be uncomfortable, but at least I know how to handle this uncomfortableness, or whatever the word that you're supposed to use there. Like, yeah, it may not be the right thing to do, but hey, I already know the consequences that are coming, and so I know what's going to happen, and I know how to handle this, and I know how to get right back here. And we have these moments where we try to shortcut things, or we want God to shortcut these parts of our lives. And if we take the shortcut, if we just bypass God and try to go around it, man, eventually we all just end up back in Egypt. And that's what God knew was going to happen with His people. And so God says there was a shorter way, but He didn't lead them along the shorter route, because He knew that if they faced war, if they faced battle, if they got into a conflict, they would just change their minds and return back to slavery. And then it says this in verse 18. It says, so God led the people around by the desert road toward the sea, and the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Now, if you've been around Greenwood for a little while, about a year ago, we actually went through this passage. And when we got to this point, I focused solely in on this idea that they left Egypt ready for battle. And we talked about looking cool. One of the several times I think that we've talked about, looking cool. When they left ready for battle, it literally means they left in battle formation. So here's the picture, and then we're going to move on from it, because we spent a lot of time, with this the last time that we went through this passage. They left Egypt in battle formation. It looked like they were ready for battle, right? When they walked out of Egypt, they left looking like they were ready for war. Here's what God knew: they weren't ready for war. Like, some of us are really good on the surface of fronting, right? Of putting up looking like that we're ready, looking like that we're prepared, looking like we can handle it, looking like we're okay, looking like everything's fine. We're really good at putting up the front. And when they left, they were putting up a front, but what God knew in His grace and mercy was that they weren't ready. It didn't matter how cool of equipment they had. It didn't matter how great the lines were in their formation. Like, God knew that if they encountered a battle, they weren't going to be able to handle it. And so what God did was He redirected their route. He took them in a different direction. He diverted the direction that they were going. Here's what I want to talk about for a few minutes. I want to talk about divine diversions. If you're taking notes, I want to invite you to write that down. Divine diversions. If there are some moments in our life where God steps in and He will divert our path, He will divert our direction and take us on a new path, on a different direction, in a way that we wouldn't even plan for ourselves, because God knows what's ahead. He knows what's best, and He knows what we have to go through. That there are some things that we go through. I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes the diversion is by design. Sometimes that God is designing those moments in our life, and sometimes we get in them and we get frustrated because we don't want to be where we are, but God is doing something in all that. Because God's always going to act for His glory and for your good. Do you realize that? That if you belong to Jesus, if you follow God, God will always act first for His glory, and if He's acting for His glory, that He is always acting for your good. And so sometimes He will divert our path on purpose to take us to where He wants to take us, even though sometimes we don't understand why. So this week, I guess on Thursday morning, some of you guys may know Jackson and Rachel Daughtery. They're members here at Greenwood, and they're a younger couple. He's an engineer. She works for Western Kentucky University. And a week ago, this past week, so 2 weeks ago, I guess, when you put everything in order, Jackson had surgery on his back. And I can't exactly remember what the surgery was for. I know that he was having some back issues, and I don't remember all the details, but he had surgery on his back. And surgery went great, but we knew that there was going to be a pretty lengthy recovery process for it. There was going to be at least 2 weeks where he was going to have a problem just sitting down, and so he was going to be off work because he can't ride in a car, and he was going to spend most of his time standing because that was going to be the most comfortable position for his back. So he goes through the surgery, and everything is going fine, and then Thursday morning he wakes up, and Jackson is having chest pains, which shouldn't be even associated with a back surgery, right? And he's having these incredible chest pains. Well, Rachel, his wife, remembers, from the very first day that they even got together, one of the things that he had spoken and his family had spoken, to her was that Jackson had a collapsed lung in high school, that had happened to him before. And I guess if that happens, you're susceptible to that, happening again. And so that if it ever happened, like you need to seek, emergency attention, quickly. And so he wakes up and he's having this chest pain, this incredible chest pain, and that's the first thing that they think of. Oh my gosh, a lung has collapsed, and so they get him to the hospital. She just takes him to the hospital. When he ends up at the hospital, his chest hasn't collapsed at all. That's not what happened. He didn't have a collapsed lung. It just kind of felt like a collapsed lung. What actually had gone on inside of him is that he had a blood clot in his lungs. And had she not taken him to the hospital, let me back up, had he not had the pain in his chest let me back up even further. Had he not had a collapsed lung in high school and thinking and trying to be aware of what's going on inside of you, he might have just associated it as something with his back, and if this was just a part of it. But because of that, God was able to move through his past, through the pain in that moment, and she had the forward thinking and enlightenment to take him to the hospital. And had she not done that, they may have not have found the clot, and he may not be with us today. But it was so bad that they started thinking immediately, okay, we don't even have the capability of handling this here in Bowling Green. He's got to go to Nashville. Well, if you remember back to Thursday, the weather was kind of inclement, so they couldn't life flight him, even though they wanted to fly him by helicopter to Nashville and get him there as quickly as possible. So they just had to go with the next best option, and that was an ambulance. And they got him there by ambulance. They tell Rachel, hey, look, you need to prepare for a week because this is going to take a little while. And so she goes down there, gets clothes, and is prepared to stay for the week. Gets there shortly after the ambulance gets there with him, and they're in it for the long haul. So I call on Friday and say, hey, just checking on you guys. I think we're going to come down and see you guys in the hospital and pray over you this afternoon. And Rachel's like, well, we may be going home. Like, what? And she's like, yeah, I know. It's the craziest thing. I think they think we might be able to go home. Like, whatever they had started doing on Thursday that God was already working through, and it's like, hey, you might be able to go home tonight. She was told to prepare for a week, and she wasn't even there a day. I mean, isn't that crazy? Now, listen, I'm telling you that story because they didn't wake up on Thursday morning planning to go to the medical center and then on to St. Thomas Hospital. Like, that wasn't part of their journey that day. It was like God had diverted their path for a moment, that God allowed him to experience the pain inside of him for a moment because he was going to work in that. Because if he hadn't experienced the pain, if he hadn't had the past to be able to even work with, maybe Jackson wouldn't even be here today. But it was because God diverted their path for a reason. Look, sometimes God will divert your path. He will divert the direction that you're traveling for a reason. And you may not like the direction you're on, but I'm just telling you, maybe God's got a reason. Maybe God's at work in something and you don't completely understand it because this isn't what you would pick for yourself or prefer for yourself, but maybe God's at work for a reason. BJ, I love my sister that sits on the second or third row every Sunday, and I hate it when she's not here because if ain't nobody else talking to me, BJ is. And so if nobody else is getting it in church, I know BJ is, because even when she's not vocal, she's at least shaking her head, and I know that I'm talking to somebody in here. But if you know BJ's story, it's like God diverted your direction in order to bring you here, BJ. And I don't know all the ins and outs, and I don't even have to know, don't even want to know. I just know that God is at work in all of it, because this would not have been your plan for yourself. Like worshiping with all these white people wouldn't have been your probably preferred preference in it, but yet you're here, and I'm so thankful that you're here, because where she was before that, her brother was a pastor for a long time at a church. And something happened in the course of that church, and basically, and again, I won't go into all the details, but the church decided they didn't want him to be the pastor anymore, and so they had managed to work it, and it was bad, and he had been there for how many years, BJ? So 10 years at this particular congregation, and they kind of worked it to push him out, and when he decided to go out, he's like, you know what, I think I'm done at this point. I think I'm just going to go ahead and retire from full-time ministry, and so he and his wife moved back to South Carolina so they could be with some other family members there, and then BJ is left in a spot, they're like, okay, now, do I keep going to this church where everybody just read off my brother as a pastor? Or do I find another church home? And it's like God had diverted your direction to bring you to this place. And why he did, I will never know. But here's what I do know. Man, you're a blessing to my life. And I know that when you're here and when you're participating, when God is moving through you, he's getting the glory for that. And I hope it's good for you, but I know it's good for the church. And I don't know what all God plans to do in and through your life as he's brought you here, but here's what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt. Man, God diverted your path to bring you here for a reason. And God is at work in that, and I am thankful for it. There's another lady, I wish she was here. Her name is Phyllis Rosowski, and if you haven't had an opportunity to meet Phyllis, man, she is one of the godliest women I think that I've ever met in my life. Every now and then I tell y'all from the pulpit, like if I need somebody to pray or I want somebody to pray for me, there's only a couple of people in my life that I actually entrust that to. Because everybody says, oh, I'll pray for you, and then they won't ever pray for you. You know those people? Be praying for you, brother. Yeah, right. I know you're not praying for me, but thank you for sharing that. This woman, though, if she is praying, like that's all she does is spends time with God. I mean, I won't give you her age because that may not be appropriate, but she's in her mid to late 70s. I'll just go ahead and give you that. She's been here for probably 6 to 8 months, and she is one of the greatest encouragers in my life. Here's what she said, and I thought this was incredible because, again, now this woman is in her mid to late 70s. She's been around the church for a long time, and listen, she's been following God for more years than I've been alive. I mean, this woman doesn't just know about Jesus. Man, she has an intimate relationship with Jesus. And she says this about Greenwood. And God diverted her here. And I'll tell you that here in just a minute. And again, I don't know why, but God brought her here. And she makes a comment just a few days ago. And she says, you know, I haven't felt at home at a church in over a decade until I came here. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I want you to think about this. We're not talking about a 30-something. We're talking about a 70-something-year-old woman who makes a comment here at Greenwood and says, I haven't felt at home at a church in more than a decade, but I feel at home here. And man, she'll sit on the second or third row, usually with her granddaughter, Sammy. And man, like, I know that she didn't grow up with the songs, but man, her hands will be up and praise to God. Man, her did that last time. She spends time with God, and it's evident just being around her that she has spent time with Jesus. Like, she didn't come to church on Sundays because she feels like, well, that's just what you do, and it's a Sunday morning. Man, she comes to church because she needs God's direction for her life, and it's evident. And she doesn't get here. Like, it's crazy to me. She walks away every Sunday, and she talks about how the Spirit of God moved in this place. You know, there are people who walk away every Sunday, and they don't feel like they felt the Spirit at all. If they don't experience the Spirit of God at all, that they walk away and go, man, I'm just not even growing in this place. How in the world is a 70-something-year-old woman able to walk away and feel like she is growing and found a home, but yet somebody else is able to walk into the place and go, I don't even feel God moving here at all. Man, it's not about what's happening out here. It's about what's happening in here. And she shows up, and she's already been with Jesus all morning. So when she comes to church, her expectations are already high of what God's going to do. Like, she didn't come here to get filled up. She's coming here to let out, to lift him up. I'm so thankful that God diverted her to this place. And I talked about earlier in the service that we just launched this new guest services team. That she's a part of that team. Like she wants to be a part of that team, is thankful to even be a part of that team to welcome it. And I want Phyllis welcoming people in the church. Today, she won't be here for 3 weeks. It's tearing her up. Because she's celebrating an anniversary, what she's excited about, but what she's tore up about is that she can't be at church. Yesterday, this is awesome. I'm texting with a 70-something-year-old woman. Yesterday, we're texting. She's wanting to know if they got Wi-Fi on Southwest Airlines because she don't want to miss a service today. She wants to know if there's Wi-Fi on the airplane because she wanted to be a part of what God was going to do here today. And I said, I think so. I hope so. Most of them got it now. Phyllis, I hope that you're watching right now. It would be really awesome if you are. But I don't know if they even have the Wi-Fi. I don't know if they even have the rate to be able to show the service live. I'm not sure. But listen to the heart of that. Now, God brought her here. She did not, when she showed up here the first Sunday that she came, that wasn't her plan. Like she didn't start off the week saying, hey, I want to come and I think I'm going to make my church home at Greenwood. No, she came through an invitation of somebody. And then all of a sudden, God had diverted her direction. And I want you to know, I won't be the only person who is blessed out of that. God is receiving his glory every single week, and there is more glory for God to receive through what God will do in and through her life and her ministry here at Greenwood Baptist Church. And that's just incredible. Man, God sometimes will divert our paths, our direction, and it's by design. It's on purpose. Sometimes God will move you in a direction that you didn't know to go, or that you didn't want to go, or that you didn't plan to go. And here's what I just want to tell you if you're a follower of Jesus. Man, God has your best interest in mind. Like God can work in that and through that, and even if you can't see it for a moment, just trust that he can move the mountain. Sometimes God will take us down roads that we didn't plan to go and didn't want to go, but man, God's doing something in that. Man, I realize, man, that some of you have plans and you have goals in your life and you're wanting to get there and you're wanting to get there really quickly, but maybe God is diverting you right now because if you got to where you're wanting to go in an instant, if you got there in a moment, you wouldn't be able to handle it when you got there. Here's what I'm becoming convinced of, and this has just happened in the last couple of weeks. God has done a reawakening and a revival inside of me, and I'm waking up and realizing some things. God has given us an incredible vision, a mission as a church, and we talk about from time to time here, we probably ought to talk about it more often, that God has given us a vision to reach about 19,000 people that live within 3 miles of our location who are considered completely unchurched because they don't have a church home, and we talk about that, and that's a pretty great mission to be a part of. And sometimes, as your pastor, I'll get focused on that, of where we're trying to go. If I can go back to last week's sermon, what's going to happen or what I feel like is going to happen. And sometimes we can get so caught up in that we miss what God is happening through us in that moment. And if you're not realizing it when you want to realize it, maybe God is doing something in the moment. Maybe if 1,000 people showed up here next week, we're not even ready for it. And so God says, I can't bring 1,000 just yet. I'm going to, but you gotta learn something right now. You gotta learn to trust me a little bit right now. We gotta do some things right now. And listen, this works in church, this works in business, this works in your employment, this works with your family. Man, that covers over all of it. Sometimes we're not getting to where we want to be, and we got this idea, this vision, and it may be from God, but it just isn't happening on your time schedule because God's doing something else for the moment. See, they could have gone a straight line distance to get where they were going, but God said, no, I'm gonna lead you around by the desert road toward the sea. And so the Israelites went up and they went ready for battle. They just didn't know they weren't going to encounter a battle right now. God had diverted their direction. It was by design. I want you to look at verse 20. It says this. After leaving Succoth, they encamped at Etham on the edge of the desert. Now, by the day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them. Everybody say, guide them. On their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Let me teach for just a moment, because this is a great setup for a really powerful point. The Hebrew people are in the desert. And for those of us who have been around the story for a little while, that's no surprise. They spend 40 years in the desert. Right now, they're just getting started in the desert. I mean, you talk about being in a place that's unknown. They are in a place that is unknown. They have never stepped very far from where they have lived and worked as slaves their entire life. And now they are moving far away from everything that they've ever known, and they are stepping out into the unknown in the most literal way. They have no idea where they are. They really don't have a clue where they're going, and they're basically hanging on a word of a man that they don't even know if they can fully trust, but God is at work in all of it. And even though God leads them out into the desert, and this is what's powerful, he does not abandon them in the desert. He leads them to the desert, but he doesn't leave them alone in the desert. What's he give them? Man, he gives them a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night. Not so that they would be amazed that, oh my gosh, look at how God is working. Look at his presence out there. No, he's given them that to guide them. That's why I had you say guide, because he's actually actively at work amongst them. He is guiding them. I want to talk for a few minutes about God's guidance. If you're taking notes, just maybe write down that headline is God's guidance in our life, that there is a God who will guide you. So some of you showed up to church, and I know because I've already been talking to a few of you this morning, and some of you showed up to church and you are in a place of unknown. Like you already are in a place where you're not so sure what's going to happen. Like you are in the thick of a battle right now in some sense, in some way, and you're not sure about the outcome, you're not sure about the direction, you're not sure what's going to happen next. Like there is all this unknown. Let's just do this. If you feel like you're like in a place right now where there's something in your life that's just a little bit unknown and maybe you're going through it, if you can have transparency with me for just a moment, we just raise your hand. That's a lot of us. All right, put your hand down. For everybody that didn't raise it, if you know what I'm talking about, like this feeling, just go ahead and raise your hand. If you at least know what I'm talking about, but you're not going through it right now. Yeah. Like in those moments, now I don't know about you, but in those moments, I want the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. Right? Like if you ever, like when you're in those moments, like God, just show me what to do. God, just where are you? Just show me the direction in this. Like I want the cloud and I want the fire because I want to be able to see God physically in front of me. Like I want to know the path that he's trying to take me down. I want to know the step that I need to step into. Like I want to know where God is and what God is doing and where he's at, especially in the unknown. And so it's easy to look at this story and think, man, why doesn't even God do that anymore? Like why doesn't God move in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire anymore? Because I'm in a place I'm not comfortable and it's unknown and I don't know what's happening next, and I just need to see God at work and God moving in this moment. God, why don't you just show up? And here's what I came to tell you this morning. You got something better. I know you don't think it, but you have something better than cloud and fire. That was God among them. You have something better than that. You have God with you if you follow Jesus. Look, I know you don't think it because you still want the fire and the cloud like I do sometimes, but you have something greater than God among you. You have God with you. I mean, I want you to think about this. Do you realize that the very Spirit of God that raised Christ from the dead lives in you? No. Do you realize that the Spirit of God that raised Christ Jesus from the dead lives inside of you? I mean, the Apostle Paul even says, do you not realize, this is in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, do you not realize that Christ lives in you? Like he's got to call the church at Corinth out because they're getting caught up in everything else. And he says, look, do you not realize that Christ Jesus, the living God, lives inside of you? That he's in you? And you got something so much better than a cloud of smoke. You got something that's so much better than a pillar of fire. I know that probably would look cool, but man, the living God is within you. That's powerful. That's better than the cloud. And it's not that just God guided for a moment. How many of you all still believe that God is at work and God guides today? Just raise your hand. How many of you all believe that God is still speaking today? Raise your hand. It's a powerful statement. Because see, we know what he said back then, but yet every one of you said that he still speaks today. Now, what he will speak today is not going to conflict with what he said back then, because God does not contradict or conflict with himself, but God is still speaking, and he is still guiding, and he is still moving. I'm not talking about God, godly wisdom, right? That's one thing. That's a great thing. You ought to seek godly counsel, godly wisdom for your life. Oftentimes what happens, though, with us is that we keep seeking godly wisdom and godly wisdom and godly wisdom, and we listen to a message, and we listen to another message, and we go to church, and we get a message, and we get a word, and then we come back Sunday, and we get another word, and we get another word, and it's like we're seeking it. But there's a God who wants to guide. Listen, God can get you through whatever you're going through. Whatever it is that you are going through, God can get you through whatever it is that you're facing, whatever it is that you're going through. God can get you through whatever battle that you're fighting, and he will guide you through it. He will speak to you in the midst of it. But a lot of times what we do is that we don't seek his guidance, and we don't seek his word. We just go around listening to it from everybody else because we're good church people, and that's all that we've known to do, but we don't ever do anything with it. And godly wisdom is a great thing to see. Godly counsel is a great thing to have. But if you have that, but you don't have his guidance, if you've got godly wisdom, but you don't have his word, then we're missing out on the greatest thing of having a relationship with the living God. I mean, you don't have to get it through other people. But God speaks through people. And God will speak to his word, but you raise your hand and you say, man, I believe God's still at work today. That's active. But God still speaks today. That's active. The problem isn't that God isn't speaking. Everybody right here, listen, so you don't miss this part. The problem isn't that God isn't speaking. The problem is that we're often just too distracted to really hear it. Not that we're blatantly not listening. It's not a matter of, oh, God is calling us in this direction. You're like, you know what, God, I hear you, but I'm going to go this way. Most of us, that's not our issue, right? Most of us, we're not just blatantly disregarding. Most of us, man, we are getting a powerful word. We're hearing God speak something into our life. God is moving us and guiding us in a direction that he's wanting to take us. He's redirecting our paths. But then we just get distracted. I don't know how it happens for you, but for me, most of the time, it's about an hour after the service. Like God will have spoken a word, but I'm already so distracted I can't even hear it anymore. And the diversions are often good things, because you got kids, you got a job to do, you got all these good things in your life, and they're good things. And it's good stuff to do, but we just get distracted by all these good things that we forget to listen to the only one who's good, our Heavenly Father. We miss it, and maybe God is speaking right now, and he just wants you to listen. Like you're trying to figure out the direction, and God is guiding you. But you've got to listen to him. And he will move you, and he will speak to you, he will guide you in the direction that he has for your life. But you gotta hear it, you gotta receive what it is that he has for them. But God took the Hebrew people out into the desert in this unknown place, but he didn't abandon them there. He didn't leave them there. He didn't leave them to fend for themselves, and he didn't show up with cloud and with fire so that they could be amazed at his presence. No, he showed up in cloud and fire to guide them to where he was taking them. And then listen to what happens. This is chapter 14, verse 1. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea." So wait a minute, God. You're leading me, and you're guiding me, and now you're telling me to turn back? Like, that doesn't even make sense, Lord. I mean, if you're in control and you know the direction that we need to go anyways, why in the world did you lead me in that direction but not stop me if that's where I was going? Like, what, God, I know that you're in charge, and I know that you're supposed to be guiding me, but now you're telling me to turn around and go back to where I've already been? God moves them through the desert, and now he says, okay, I want you to stop where you're going. I want you to turn back, and I want you to go back to where you came from, because I'm going to do something there. Well, Lord, do you understand, Lord, that if I do this, I'm going to look like I'm completely lost out here? Like, we just walked away from Egypt, and there's some people who are coming after us. The last thing that we want to look like, because we got to keep up appearances, right? The last thing that we want to look like is that we don't know what we're doing and that we're lost out here. I mean, let's not give them a reason to come after us. God, don't you realize that if I do this, I'm going to look like an idiot? Don't you realize if I do this, we're going to look like we're lost? And God says, that's exactly the point. I want them to think that you're lost. So he tells them to turn around and to go back to where they come from. And God says in verse 3, and Pharaoh, who's coming after them, will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And he says, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. God was setting them up for one of the most incredible miracles that would ever take place that would be known all over the world. If they don't look like they're wandering in the desert, then they don't get to a place where they're camping by the sea, because the next thing that God's going to do, as the army gets close and the battle is closing in on them, and maybe you're in a place today and you feel like the battle is starting to close in on you, and if it catches up with you, you can't take it. And the battle is going to draw close to them, and then Moses is going to turn around and God's going to say, take that staff that I gave you to work my wonders, and I want you to use it, and I want you to put it into the water, and when you do, I am going to split the sea, and I'm going to do before Pharaoh what the world has never seen before. And when I get done, when the word gets out in Egypt, they will all know that these stones and the statues that they have carved to worship as their God, that all that are false gods, that I am the one true God, and I will gain glory for myself, and I will deliver you. This will be for your good, but first it's going to be for my glory. And I guarantee you that when all that happened, there was confusion among the people. They were questioning their leader. They were questioning, why in the world are we doing this? Why in the world are we turning around? Why in the world do we got to go back in the direction? If that's where we were supposed to be, why didn't we just stop there? See, some of you all, your battle is not necessarily what happens in front of you on a day-to-day basis. Your battle is just where you're at right now. That you just don't like the path that you're on. That you're confused by it, and you feel like you're wandering. You thought you would be married by now, but every time you get in a relationship, it just falls apart, and you end up in the same place, and you don't like the path that you're on. For some of you, like you're living vicariously through your children, and you want your children to be the athlete that you never was, and they like more, they like kicking the dirt more, and they like running after the ball, and it tears you up. Because you just don't like the path that you're on right now. For some of you, you thought you had the raise by now, and you've been working hard for it, and you've been waiting to be noticed, and you've been waiting to be noticed, and you've been waiting to be noticed, and you've been putting yourself out there, but nobody notices, and you keep going, the distance, and you going out of your way, and you keep, going over and beyond what's expected of you, and you hadn't gotten the raise. And you hadn't gotten the raise, and you hadn't gotten the rise, and you're just trying to figure out, do people even notice where I'm at right now? Does nobody know? God, do you not even care? And we just get frustrated about the path that we're on. For some of us, we're moving in a direction, and it's not that we're doing anything immoral. It's not that we're doing anything illegal. It's just we're not getting to the place where we want to be, where we hope to be. But maybe God has diverted your direction for a reason. Maybe God's at work in all of it. I mean, wouldn't you have loved to have been at the edge of the Red Sea with Pharaoh and his pursuing army, and to see God part the waters and cross over to the other side on dry ground and be a part of God getting that kind of glory from himself? Well, guess what? That didn't happen without some wandering. They didn't get to experience that moment with God without first wandering in the desert. But they had to trust him in that. They had to walk with him in that. And maybe God is simply calling you this morning to walk with him again. To walk with him again. In some area of your life where you just need to begin to walk with him again. To listen to the God who is guiding you and drawing you, speaking to you. And quit trying to take the shortcut. Even your salvation, though it was instantaneous, it wasn't a shortcut. The suffering of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, the resurrection of our Savior, that wasn't a shortcut. It feels instantaneous to you, but it wasn't a shortcut. And maybe you're trying to shortcut something in your life, and God is trying to pull you through, and you just need to trust him. Trust him in whatever process that God is leading you through and bringing you through right now. And so I want to invite you in this moment to respond to whatever it is that God is speaking into your heart, that you wouldn't allow this moment to pass by. That whatever God is moving in you, that you would just allow him to move that and don't let it pass you by. So let me pray for us. Heavenly Father,